Everything that I prepared is from the Act itself. Yeah, that's a disclaimer. Just certainly rules and regulations will be published. I think the Act itself said the Secretary would publish regulations within 90 days. That may be a bit optimistic, but there will be rules published, and we need to watch those very closely, and hopefully a lot of the answers to a lot of the questions that came up here this morning will be addressed in those rules, in those regulations. And then, of course, FSA will issue handbook procedures, so it's really important that you stay in touch with your local FSA office. And that sounds like a great idea to get signed up for the email and stay on top of the information as they receive that. Would like to introduce Jill Lieberhart. She probably doesn't need an introduction. I think a lot of you know Jill. She grew up in this area and worked a long time in our Goodland office. She's now in our Loveland office. And, we've got to kind of pack up here and head for another meeting. So if you would like to visit with a representative from Kennedy & Co., if you can't catch me, why holler at Jill, and she'd be glad to visit with you. With that, I'd like to take a look at some of the handouts here. I'd like to make a comment or two, and then I'll get into a PowerPoint presentation. The first sheet you should see is the PLC reference price and loans. And really what this is just a comparison against the prior program against the new program. And you know, you're going to hear a lot of new acronyms. Jenny talked about, and Lee did too, you know, PLC and ARC, you're going to hear that a lot. And so it behooves us all to learn some new acronyms. You know, just about the time you get the old ones learned, well, they change them up on us. So anyway, as you can see, target prices are now reference prices. And you can compare what the new reference prices are that, of course, directly impact PLC payments. Loan rates, you can take a look at the change in loan rates. As Jenny mentioned, direct payments are gone. And then I've also listed what the maximum counter-cyclical payments were, the maximum PLC. I would ask you to make one correction there on Oates. Under the loan rates, you see it should be $1.39, and over under the maximum PLC, instead of $1.07, that should be $1.01. You'd make that correction on your sheet. But anyway, so it's a good reference tool. You know, I've been asked, well, why is it important to know what the maximum price loss coverage payment rate might be? And really the answer to that is, you know, these payments are going to come out a year, they're going to be a year behind. I mean, and we haven't seen advanced payments in the last 2 years anyway, but when we take a look at the 2014 program, what are those payments, depending on if there are payment rates that justify actual payments, when will those come out? They won't be out until October of 2015, because in all cases we're tied to the national average price. And if we take a look at wheat and small grains, the marketing year starts in June 1st through May. And if we look at corn and spring planted crops, they start September 1st. So we've got to get past the marketing period before we really know what that national average price does. You know, a lot of operations, and I've seen it over the years as I've worked with many of you, you know, one of the first questions is, well, what kind of payments might I be looking at? And, you know, how does payment limit affect me? And so it's really helpful to take a look at what these projected payments might be. We do know that, and we'll look at a slide here in a minute that identifies that the limitation went from $40,000 that we had under direct payments and $65,000 under counter-cyclical. We went to, now we're at $125,000 for PLC or ARC County or ARC individual, and that also includes any marketing loan gains for LDPs, and hopefully prices don't get that low. We get back into that program. But at any rate, the rate has gone up, but let me tell you that there could be some pretty sizable payments. We're going to look at a farm example here in a little bit and run through some numbers. But because of high prices the last 5 years, and particularly under like on corn, on County Arc, we're seeing some pretty big numbers come up, even with average prices, because of the high prices. And now, because we're going to look at a national average price to determine a payment rate. So anyway, it's something to sure keep your eye on. I guess where I was going with that is, if you got a spouse involved in the operation, or son or daughter, but you're just reported with FSA as a sole proprietor, you might want to think about updating your farm operating plan and actually identifying your wife. Maybe think about a general partnership. You have FSA has a term they call status date, and that's June 1st. In other words, they're going to look at the way your operation's structured as of June 1st, and that's what will determine the number of payment limits on your farm. So anyway, there could be some sizable payments over the next 5 years, particularly if prices decline. So anyway, consider that and take a look at your operation, see who's really involved. If there is the opportunity to have a spouse or a son or daughter that's part of that operation, you may want to consider doing that. The next worksheet here is the base reallocation. We've talked some about that. What the Act says, the Act specifically says, if you don't reallocate base, then you're going to use the base that was in effect as of October 1st, 2013. And if, many of these bases go back to 1985. Again, if there was some oilseed crops added back in 2002, then there was an opportunity to change base a little bit. But if that wasn't the case, they do go back, to 85. So now you can never increase base. Base reallocation just simply means you're going to take a look at your planted acreage in the last 4 years, 2009 through 12. That's the designated period in the Act. And if a good example, I've got a producer up in Jamestown, North Dakota, and they planted a lot of wheat and oats and barley in 85. So they have a lot of those base acres. And so, what they planted in 2009 through 12 is almost exclusively corn and soybeans. So they'll be able to actually shift base from wheat, barley, and oats to corn and soybeans. So that's what the reallocation process is all about. And hey, that can be huge. If we change, in this example we're going to look at, we're going to double the corn base. If you're able to increase your yield, because yield update, we're going to look at that here in a minute, if you're able to update your yield from, say, maybe 120 bushel to 180 or 200 bushel, and you're able to double your corn base, and corn prices go down, there could be some that could double your corn payment. So there's some real key issues here in base reallocation and yield updates. And you'll see here towards the back, I've talked about 10 things producers can do to get ready for this. As Lee and Jenny mentioned, there's a lot of things yet that have to be announced, but the things you need to be focused on now is base reallocation. And what do you need to do that? You've got your FSA 578 certification form, or get your production data and history report from Federal Crop. They list your planted acreage. So you need to know what your planted acreage were in those 4 years, 9 through 12. And then there is an adjustment. Does say that you're going to have to, on base reallocation, it simply just looks at what you planted compared to what your base acreage are. And we prepared this worksheet. It's a freestanding form. It's got all the information you need to reallocate those base acres. If you want the interactive form, Gordon Pettibone, my assistant in Goodland, his email address is on the bottom of that in the lower right-hand corner. If you're a Kennedy & Co. client, you get it free. If you're not, we just ask you to fill out a questionnaire to consider maybe the possibility of working with Kennedy & Co. If you're willing to do that, we'll send you the interactive file. But this is freestanding, and you can use it just like it is. All the Excel spreadsheet does is work with the numbers. So base reallocation is pretty important. I'll go through an example exactly how that's going to work. Yield update worksheet. Again, that's a 5-year period, 2008 through 12. Again, this is really important, particularly on irrigated yields. And what we've seen with new varieties of seed, significant increase in yields. you know, a lot of those corn yields, we're seeing, you know, 118 bushel, 120, and if you could jump that up, it'll have a significant impact on your payments. So again, a freestanding worksheet, you can use it as is, or again, if you want to get a copy of that, contact Gordon at his email address and he'll shoot you a copy of that. There is a caveat there that if we do need the county average yield, because there's a caveat that says that if any year in that 5-year period falls below 75%, I believe it is, of the county average yield, then you get to use a plug yield for that year. In some disaster years that we've had, that could be pretty important. So the next sheet is just a whole page of instructions on how to go to NAS and Quick Start and find those county average yields. Now, we've done that for some clients, and what's kind of interesting, there are some missing data. And, you know, there's another question. What are we going to do if we don't have, for that 5-year period, we don't have the full 5 years on county average yield? I don't know the answer to that. Maybe there's the average 3 years, or maybe they'll go to an area yield for that particular year, a missing year. We don't know. Hopefully that'll be clarified in the regulations. But anyway, you can find those yields on the NAS webpage. The last two handouts are just some things to think about in preparing for this, and I'll go over those a little later. And then the last handout is just kind of a summary of services provided in our ag group through Kennedy & Co. What I'd like to do now is go through kind of a PowerPoint. And some of this is going to be redundant on what Jenny and Lee said, and I won't spend too much time on it. And then I want to get into an actual farm example that I think will help explain a lot of this, because you can look at slides and you can read news releases, and those are fine, but at least for me, an example really helps me understand the process. And the point isn't that you're going to remember everything in that worksheet for that farm. You're not going to. The point of that worksheet is to say, you know, here's the calculations. There's going to be calculators. Texas A&M is already working on a program. They were one of the universities selected. I think Purdue also. FAPRA, I think, will probably come up with a good number cruncher calculator to help you. But you know how that works. If you don't understand the process, it's a little bit hard to understand the output. Excuse me. So that's what I hope to be able to do here this morning, is just show you the process. PLC is really simple. County ARC isn't too complicated. It's a bit more complicated. Individual ARC is very complicated. But at any rate, hopefully you'll be able to understand that process. Excuse me. This just talks about some of the services that Kennedy & Co. has been able to provide over the years. Linda mentioned I was the county executive director. I also spent 10 years in the Colorado State ASCS office. I'm going to date myself a little bit when I talk about ASCS, because we know that's Farm Service Agency now. But anyway, a lot of years of experience with the agency, with farm programs, and now 25 years with Kennedy & Co. But we helped a lot of producers around the regulations, analyzing this farm bill. We will be helping producers help you look at your farm operations and make these elections. If you'd like to get on a list, we're not able to do that right now. Excuse me, because just like Jenny said, we're not sure what 5 years we're going to be working with as far as national average prices and yields. Is it 2008 through 12 or 9 through 13? My guess is it's 8 through 12. And the reason I say that is because we're not going to know what the national average price is for 2013 until, middle September, early part of October. That means we can't do any detailed analysis until that time. If they elect 8 through 12, we already know what those national average prices are, and we can jump in immediately once we get some clarification on some of these issues and start the analysis process. But if you're interested in some help, contact Gordon and get on a list. We've done a lot of appeals, assisted producers with the restructuring operations. You know, if you do, there's some real horror stories where attorneys or other accountants have done some estate planning. There's a case up in Idaho where an attorney did an estate plan and took land owned by 4 or 5 individuals, put it into a limited partnership. It was the right answer for estate planning. It was exactly the wrong answer for CRP payments because they went from 5 limits to 1 limit. They didn't contact FSA. It rolled along 2 or 3 years. They get audited. FSA says, well, this is a family limited partnership, not owned by the 5 of you, and we want $500,000 back in payment. So, you know, it was a real easy fix. You know, all they really had to do was go ahead and form the family limited partnership and lease it back to the individuals to operate it. So again, understanding the regulations can be really important in protecting these payments. We've been able to help producers with those kind of issues. Providing technical information to other accountants and attorneys around the country, some litigation support, an array of services to clients, selecting their best options. So those are some of the services we've focused on over the last 25 years. Okay, let's take a look at an overview. You know, what's interesting about this bill, this $956 billion, when you look at the commodity program, that's only 5% of the dollars. When we look at conservation, that represents about 6% of it, and crop insurance actually went up a little bit, 9%. So you can see in the big picture, of course, we've all known that SNAP is the program that consumes the largest amount of the funding. I'm going to focus primarily on commodity title. I will make a comment or two on conservation and Title 11 crop insurance, but most of the focus will be here on the commodity program. You know, one of the things that I never understood was, why do we still have permanent 3849 Act? I mean, these were past a half a century. Those don't fit farming today. I mean, why haven't they deleted those permanent acts? And really, I think, you know, I've come to understand in this last few years, and all the wrangling that was done around getting a new farm bill passed, it really does force Congress to do something. I mean, without the permanent act, you know, agriculture's losing a lot of support in Congress. We don't have quite the impact that we had back in the 80s, but at any rate, it does force Congress to do something. In fact, when they extended the 2012 into 2013, that was late in December, if you recall, and there was a lot of discussions about what was going to happen to milk prices. They said milk prices would double or triple under the old parity system, and they weren't about to let that happen, so they extended it. And of course, so I think what it does, it probably is a good thing with respect to when the 2018 Farm Bill elapses, it probably makes Congress pass a new Farm Bill. So maybe it isn't all bad after all. We've talked about direct and countercyclical and acre payments being gone. They're eliminated. We've got the yield update option. Now, the act itself says the landowner will make this election, both on yield updates and base. You know, we'll have to wait and see that, you know, I would guess the federal regs will support that because that's what's in the act. The problem with that is, you know, if you've got a lot of absentee landowners, maybe a absentee landowner that lives in California that doesn't understand anything about these farm programs, you're going to have to maybe do a telephone call or two and convince her that there's some options here that not only are to your advantage as a tenant, but probably to the advantage of the farm itself and the value of the land, and hopefully you can convince the landowner to participate in that and make the election. But it looks like at this time, at least from the act, it's the owner that has to make that request. Also applies price loss coverage election. Now, with regard to PLC and ARC, actually the act says that it's the producer. And by definition, a landowner has not been a producer unless they share rent and share in the crop. But again, that's something we just need some clarification in the final regs about. Secretary may allow yield updates regardless of PLC or ARC. You know, if you read the act, the update only applies to price loss coverage. But Vilsack at the Commodity Classic in San Antonio did make the comment that we may allow everyone to update even if you go into ARC. And I think what they're going to do with respect to the price supplemental coverage option, because we know that may be available, the Act says it'll be available, and I think Lee's got some information that was sent down from USDA that indicated that might be on a selected county basis. But at any rate, it sounds like they may allow you to select PLC on wheat because you're going to be planting wheat this fall. And then if you later, whenever that sign up ends in January or February 2015, if you would elect to go into ARC, would let you withdraw from the supplemental coverage option without any penalty. So that'd be a pretty good option, something to think about. You know, when we've run some of the numbers, it looks like on wheat, it's kind of a toss-up between PLC and ARC. So, you know, if it's close, then maybe PLC might be the better option in that, you know, you'd have an option somewhere down the road with the what they're going to call SCO, supplemental coverage option, and also, you know, prices continue to decline. I think PLC payments may surprise folks because as the rate comes down, PLC payment rate goes up. The updated yield formula is the average of the 8 through 12. I've talked about that. It's by farm number. Actual yield for 5 years, base period cannot be less than 75% of the county average yield. Little help there in some disaster years. Again, owner option to reallocate base acres. And I say here, you know, in this educational process that to the extent you can, try to include your landowners, because it may well be, even on PLC and ARC elections, that, you know, it wouldn't surprise me to see the final rules come out and say that the landowners are involved in that election. If you think about it, you know, it could affect the value of the land. This gentleman over here made the comment that if the farm is sold, whatever the election's made, that's what stays with that farm. So if you succeed to a farm and succeed to those contracts, you can't change those elections. So they could affect the value of the farm itself, and my guess is they may be involved then in the actual election process. We've said reallocating base can increase the total acreage. We'll look at an example of that. You're just shifting from one crop to another, but you're not increasing base. Base reallocation will affect both price loss coverage and ARC risk coverage. You know, what's kind of interesting is, you know, I think back the last couple of years and all the discussion around, you know, unpopularity of direct payments. A lot of folks were saying, well, geez, you mean farmers really get paid if they don't even plant the crop? And so direct payments weren't very popular. Well, what's interesting about PLC and ARC, it's not based on your planted acreage. Somebody the other day or yesterday asked the question, well, what if I plant alfalfa, or what if I plant other non-covered commodity crops? Well, guess what? It doesn't matter what you plant. Now, there is an exception to that we'll look at under individual ARC coverage in calculating a payment rate. But once that payment rate's calculated, you always go back to base acres. And that's why if you can reallocate base, it may be a big advantage. So it's base acres times the base factor. It's 85% on PLC and county ARC. It's 65% on individual ARC. And then it's times your yield. Now, we're going to look at, on PLCs, it's going to be the countercyclical yield. We believe, that's not spelled out specifically in the Act. It's either going to, we think, be the countercyclical yield or your updated yield, if you elect to do that and you're able to do that. With respect to county ARC, we're looking at county average yields. With respect to individual ARC, we're looking at your APH yield, your proven yield from the past 5 years. So again, back to, it's not what you actually plant, it comes back to your actual base acres. Cotton producers, cotton's no longer a covered commodity. We don't have cotton here, but that went into a generic base. and they get some transition payments. I think we've covered the base reallocation pretty well. Reallocation of base, can increase base. You know, again, we're encouraging everybody to go in, if you see it as an advantage to increase yields, to do so, irregardless of what final election you might make. This, Jenny mentioned that, you know, this decision, it has to be unanimous. So if you're the operator on the farm and you sub-rent on 80 acres out to another producer, and they're called an interested producer on that farm, they're going to be involved in the election. So everybody that shares in the crop on that farm for 2014 will be involved in coming together in what election you should make. And if there's not a unanimous election, not only will FSA make an election for you starting in 2015, which will be PLC on all crops, but you're also ineligible for any 2014 payments. So, you know, read everything you can, attend as many seminars as you can. I mean, I've been through that act probably 5 times, and every time I go through it, I learn something. So, you know, really get familiar, because, as Jenny said, it's a one-shot deal. It's not, you know, the past Farm Bill, every year you had to go in and sign up. This time it's a one-year deal. Gentleman asked the question yesterday, well, geez, if sign-up doesn't start till 15, what happens to 2014? Well, remember, because it's a one-time sign-up, USDA said, we've got a lot to do. We're going to focus on livestock feed and livestock loss program, and we'll roll this commodity program out a little later. Yes, you may have some advantage in knowing what your production is for 2014, what the national average price is, but that's only 1 year out of 5. When these calculators come out, you're going to be looking at 5 years. In fact, that's what makes it pretty difficult about, you know, you're going to have to be projecting what you think your production is going to be over the next 5 years, and also price. You know, we can tell you what the formulas are and how to do it, but a key here is projecting prices and projecting production out over that 5-year period, and that's tough to do. You know, the price loss coverage is very similar to the countercyclical program. You know, countercyclical, if the 12-month national average price dropped below then the target price, now the reference price, there was a payment on the farm. And that's the way that PLC will work. You know, what's interesting about looking ahead at prices, so what happens to the PLC rate if prices continue to decline over the 5-year period? Payment rate goes up, right? In fact, it can go all the way to the loan rate, and that's the maximum PLC rate that I showed you on that chart. So as prices continue to decline, the PLC payment rate will go up. Conversely, if we look at revenue, and that's what the County ARC and Individual ARC program is about, that's a 5-year moving average. And so if prices continue to go down, that 5-year average price is going to come down. Now, will that make up the difference? Because there could be some pretty substantial payments the first couple of years because of the high prices that we've seen, even with average normal yields. So, but that's kind of an interesting comparison, that 5-year moving average is going to take revenues down over that 5-year period, if in fact that's what happens. And a lot of the experts, you know, USDA, the FAPRA data that's projecting prices is all projecting a decline in prices in the later years of the Farm Bill. So something to think about as you get into the election and analysis process. PLC and County ARC could be made on a crop-by-crop basis. And this example we look at here in a little bit, that's what we're going to do, is we're going to take 3 crops and we're going to look to see, okay, which option